My son stayed silent as his wife sent me to a nursing home, until he saw the papers I signed. The morning they came to take me away, Daniel couldn't look me in the eye. He stood in the doorway of the house I'd raised him in, the house his father and I had bought with a down payment scraped together from 2 years of overtime, and he studied the welcome mat like it held the answers to a test he hadn't studied for. His wife, Renata, did the talking. She always did the talking now. "It's just for a little while, Alina," she said, folding one of my cardigans with the brisk efficiency of a woman packing up a stranger's apartment. "Just until we get the house sorted out, you understand?" I did not understand, but I was 78 years old, and my hip had never healed right after the fall, and I had learned, in the 11 months since my husband Frank died, that arguing with Renata was like arguing with weather. It didn't change anything except how tired you were afterward. "Daniel," I said, just his name. I wanted him to look at me. He didn't. He carried my suitcases to the car, 2 suitcases, for 40 years of living, and he drove me to Willowbrook Senior, living with his hands at 10 and 2 and his jaw tight the whole way, like a man delivering a package he didn't want to think too hard about. When we pulled up to the building, beige and low and smelling faintly of bleach even from the parking lot, he finally spoke. "It's a nice place, Mom. Renata found it. They have a garden." "I have a garden," I said. "Hads have. I don't know anymore, Daniels, you tell me." He flinched. Good, let him flinch. He signed the intake papers without reading them closely. I watched his pen move fast, the way it used to move when he was 17 and rushing through homework to get to a basketball game. Renata had highlighted where he needed to sign, little yellow tabs like she'd done this before, like she'd rehearsed it. And Daniel, my son, the boy I had rocked through croup and taught to ride a bike and sat beside through 3 surgeries on his father's heart, signed away my address without asking me a single question about what I wanted. He kissed my cheek before he left. It felt like an apology he didn't have the courage to say out loud. I did not cry in front of him. I want that understood. I waited until the door of room 114 closed behind me, until I heard his car pull out of the lot, and only then did I sit down on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine and let myself feel exactly as small as they had made me. But I want to tell you something about myself that Daniel had forgotten, or maybe had never fully understood in the first place. I was not a woman who stayed small for long. My name is Alina Whitfield, and before I was anyone's mother or anyone's grandmother or anyone's inconvenient elderly problem to be relocated, I was a paralegal for 31 years at a firm in the city, first for old man Castellano and then for his son, and in those 31 years I read more contracts, more estate documents, more wills contested and uncontested than most attorneys read in their careers. I filed papers. I caught mistakes. I once found a clerical error in a trust document that saved a widow $400,000, and Mr. Castellano bought me a bottle of champagne and told me I had a mind like a steel trap. That mind did not retire when I did. It got quieter, maybe. It got tired, certainly, especially after Frank passed and grief sat on my chest like a stone every morning for months, but it did not disappear. Renata had made a mistake that I don't think she ever considered. She assumed that because I was old and because I was sad, and because my son had gone silent and pliable in her hands, that I was also foolish. I was not foolish. I had simply been waiting to see how far it would go. It had started small, the way these things always do. First it was Renata suggesting, over a stiff Sunday dinner 4 months after Frank's funeral, that the house was a lot of house for one person. Then it was her mentioning, with the casualness of someone discussing the weather, that her cousin was a real estate agent and could get us an excellent number if we ever thought about selling. Then it was Daniel, softer, guiltier, asking if I'd thought about maybe somewhere smaller, Mom, somewhere easier. I should have understood sooner what easier meant. It didn't mean easier for me. The house, my house, Frank's and my house, paid off in full 11 years before he died, sat on 2 acres in a part of town that had in the last 5 years become unfashionably fashionable. Young families wanted in. Developers wanted in. A man in a polo shirt had knocked on my door in March, before Frank was even a year gone, and asked if I'd ever considered selling because properties like mine with that acreage, that close to the new school district, were once in a generation. I hadn't considered it. I told him so. He left his card anyway. I found that card again 3 weeks after they moved me into Willowbrook. It was tucked into a kitchen drawer I still had a key to, in a house I was no longer allowed to live in, and I only found it because Renata, in her hurry to have me gone, had forgotten to change the locks before I'd had one last supervised visit to collect some of Frank's old files. She stood in the doorway the whole time, arms crossed, watching me like I might steal the silverware. I didn't take the silverware. I took the card, and I took something else too, something she didn't know was worth taking. I took note of the manila folder sitting on Frank's old desk, the one with a real estate attorney's letterhead peeking out from under a stack of unopened mail, addressed to Daniel and Renata Whitfield. I did not open it in front of her. I am a patient woman. I have always been a patient woman. It is, I think, the thing that saved me. Here is what I want you to understand about Willowbrook, because I don't want this to become a story about how terrible the place was, because it wasn't, not really. The staff were tired but not cruel. The food was bland but not inedible. My roommate, a sharp-tongued former schoolteacher named Dot who'd been there 6 years and had opinions about everyone including God, became, in a strange and unexpected way, the first real friend I'd made in a decade. "Your son do this to you?" Dot asked, the second night, not unkindly. "His wife did," I said. "He just didn't stop her." Dot snorted. "That's worse, in my opinion. My daughter at least had the decency to look me in the eye when she dropped me here. Cried the whole drive. Still dropped me here, mind you, but she cried." "Daniel didn't cry," I said. "Daniel signed papers." Dot went quiet at that. "What kind of papers?" I didn't know yet. That was the problem. That was the itch under my skin every single night in that narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling tile above me. Running through 31 years of legal training like a woman running her hands along a wall in the dark, searching for a door. So I did what I had always done when something didn't sit right. I started asking questions, quietly, patiently, the way you catch an error in a contract, not by demanding answers, but by reading everything twice. I called Marjorie first. Marjorie had been my closest friend since our children were in diapers together, and more importantly, Marjorie's son-in-law was a title attorney who owed me a favor from a decade back, when I'd helped untangle a mess in his own mother's estate for free, on my own time, because that's what friends did. "Elena," Marjorie said when I called from the pay phone in the Willowbrook common room, because Renata had misplaced my cell phone during the move, a detail I noted and filed away like everything else. "Honey, are you all right? Daniel told me you were settling in nicely." "Daniel doesn't know how I'm settling," I said. "Marjorie, I need a favor. I need to know if a property has had a title search run on it recently. My property, Frank's and my address." There was a pause. Marjorie was no fool either. "Elena, what is going on?" I think," I said slowly, feeling the shape of it as I spoke it aloud for the first time, "that my daughter-in-law is trying to sell my house out from under me, and I think she's using my son's signature to do it." It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of phone calls made on that pay phone with quarters. Dot smuggled me from the vending machine change she hoarded like treasure. 2 weeks of Marjorie's son-in-law pulling records, discreetly, the way you pull a thread to see how much unravels. 2 weeks of me sitting in the Willowbrook garden. They did in fact have a garden, small and rose-choked, and the one true mercy of that place, reconstructing in my mind everything I remembered about estate law, about power of attorney, about the exact language Frank and I had used 15 years earlier when we'd drawn up our wills. Because here is the thing Renata did not know, and Daniel, in his fog of grief and guilt and marital submission, had apparently forgotten entirely. The house was never fully his to sign away. Frank and I had put it in a trust. Not for tax reasons, though there were those too, but because Frank's mother had gone through a bitter, protracted probate fight after his father died, and Frank had sworn, sitting at our kitchen table with a legal pad in 1998, that it would never happen to our children. The house was held in the Whitfield Family Trust, with myself as the primary trustee and beneficiary during my lifetime, with Daniel named as successor trustee only upon my death, or a formal, notarized declaration of my incapacity. A declaration I had never signed. A declaration that, as far as I knew, no doctor had ever been asked to make. Which meant that whatever papers Daniel had signed at that title company, and Marjorie's son-in-law confirmed there had indeed been a preliminary sale agreement drawn up, contingent on trustee transfer, with a closing date set for 6 weeks out, were built on nothing. A house of cards. A house of cards being sold out from under the very house it represented, which struck me, sitting in that rose garden, as darkly, almost comically appropriate. I could have called a lawyer that day and stopped the whole thing cold. Frozen the trust, sent a cease and desist, ended it in an afternoon with a single fax. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was the 31 years of legal patience in me, the paralegal's instinct to gather everything, to build the airtight case before you move. But part of it, the larger part if I'm honest, was that I wanted Daniel to see it himself. I wanted him to be the one to find the papers, to understand what he'd done, without me pointing a finger at him from a nursing home bed like a wounded, vindictive old woman. I had spent 78 years believing my son had a good heart, buried somewhere under whatever fear or exhaustion had let him go quiet in his own home. I wanted to give that heart one more chance to speak before I filed anything. So instead, I asked Marjorie's son-in-law to do one more thing, I asked him to send the closing documents, not to Renata's lawyer, not to the title company, but to Daniel directly at his office, where Renata wouldn't be standing over his shoulder highlighting where to sign. And I waited. He came to Willowbrook on a Tuesday, unannounced, which he had not done once in the 6 weeks I'd been there. Dot saw him first from her chair by the window and gave a low whistle. "Your boy's here," she said, "and Alina, he looks like he's seen a ghost." He had a manila folder in his hands, the same kind Frank used to use for his tax records, thick and battered at the corners from being opened, and closed too many times in too short a span of days. "Mom," his voice cracked on the single syllable. "Mom, is this real? The trust, is this real?" "It's real, Daniel." Renata said the house was ours. She said after Dad died it just passed to us. She said you'd signed off on it when you agreed to move here, that it was part of the paperwork, that he stopped. Sat down hard in the plastic chair across from my bed, the folder trembling slightly in his hands. "I never read what I was signing. God help me, Mom, I never read a single page. She just kept saying it was for you, it was to make things easier for you, and I was so tired and so sad, and I let her hold the pen." "I know," I said. "You knew?" "I've known for 2 weeks. I've had a lawyer pull the records. I know the closing was 6 weeks out. I know she had a buyer already, a young family, cash offer above asking. I know all of it, Daniel." His face did something complicated then, shame and relief and horror all fighting for space, the way a face looks when it's finally allowed to feel something it's been suppressing for months. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop it?" I reached over and took his hand, the way I used to when he was small and frightened of thunder, because I wanted to see if you'd stop it yourself, and because, Daniel, I needed to know if my son was still in there, under whatever this last year turned you into. He put his head down on the edge of my bed and cried the way he hadn't cried at the house, hadn't cried in the car, hadn't cried once through this entire slow-motion betrayal, cried like the boy who used to bring me every broken thing he found in the yard, certain I could fix it. "I'm going to fix this," he said when he could speak again. "I'm going to fix all of it." I would like to tell you it was simple after that. It was not simple. There were lawyers, and there was a very ugly conversation at the house that I was not present for but heard about in fragments from Marjorie, who heard it from her son-in-law, who heard it from the county courthouse gossip that apparently exists in every small legal community in America. There was Renata, furious, insisting she'd only been trying to help, that a woman my age shouldn't be rattling around alone in a house that size, that everything she'd done had been for my own good. Perhaps she even believed that. People are remarkably skilled at believing the version of themselves that lets them sleep at night. But the trust held, the sale collapsed. The title company, once they understood the beneficiary declaration had never been executed, backed out within the week, citing liability concerns, and the young cash-offer family bought a different house 2 streets over instead, a fact I confess gave me a small, ungenerous satisfaction every time I drove past it in the years after. Daniel moved me out of Willowbrook himself, on a Saturday, no highlighted forms this time. He didn't take me back to the old house, not right away, that would come later, once things had settled, once I'd decided for myself freely, without anyone standing over my shoulder, what settling meant to me at 78. Instead, he took me to his own house first, set me up in the guest room with the good mattress, and told Renata in front of me, in a voice I hadn't heard him use since he was a teenager standing up to a bully on his little league team, that nothing about my care, my home, or my future would ever again be decided without my voice in the room. I stayed with them for 4 months while the two of us, Daniel and I, mostly without Renata, who found other things to occupy her time during that period, sorted out what came next. In the end, I chose something neither of them expected, not the old house, too big and too full of ghosts for me to want back full-time, and not another facility either. A small condo, 2 bedrooms, close enough to Daniel that he could visit without it being an occasion, far enough that neither of us could pretend I was anyone's burden. Dot came to visit sometimes, once she found out where I'd landed. She always brought vending machine candy, out of habit, and always asked the same question when she walked through my door. They ever apologize, really apologize, not the sorry you feel that way kind. Daniel did, I told her the last time she asked, properly, on his knees practically, at my kitchen table, the same table his father drew up that trust on 20-some years ago, told me he'd carry the shame of that year for the rest of his life. And her. I thought about it a long moment, the way I used to think about the fine print in a difficult contract, looking for what was really being said underneath the words. Renata told me she was sorry I'd been so upset by it all, I said, which isn't quite the same thing, is it? Dot laughed, that sharp schoolteacher's bark of a laugh. No, Alina, it certainly is not. I think about that manila folder often, the one Daniel carried into Willowbrook that Tuesday, hands shaking. I think about how close it came to being closed forever without him ever opening it. How close I came to spending whatever years I had left in a beige room that smelled of bleach, visited on holidays by a son who couldn't meet my eyes, all because two people assumed an old woman's silence meant an old woman's surrender. But 31 years reading contracts teaches you something that has nothing to do with law and everything to do with people. Everyone reveals themselves eventually, in the fine print, in the papers they're willing to sign without reading, and the ones they refuse to sign at all. Renata revealed herself the day she folded my cardigans like she was packing up a stranger. Daniel revealed himself the day he finally opened that folder and saw, in black and white, exactly what his silence had almost cost him. I keep the folder still on a shelf in my condo, next to a photograph of Frank at the kitchen table where he drew up the trust that saved me. Not as a weapon, not anymore, just as a reminder for myself and for Daniel, who visits every Sunday now without fail, who reads everything twice before he signs it, who learned the hard way that love without a voice in the room isn't protection at all. It's just another kind of silence, and I had already spent 78 years learning exactly how much that costs.